Hello, 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 hello. How's this sound? How's this sound? How's this sound? How does it sound? Well, this is kind of awkward, but this is how it turned out to be. As I was trying to make a long ass video. At first, it was obviously a pretty short video. It was about to be a 5 minute quick explanations about nens this, nens that, and just as nen things go, things expanded. My nen came up, it just reached new height, and I had to talk about a lot more because as things go, you think you understand the concept in this story, and you think about it just a bit too much, and boom, it sort of expands. It's like popcorn. Just put it under the heat or whatever source of heat you're using, and poof, you find out it's hella big, and there's a whole lot of details up in there. So what's this popcorn about? Well, the popcorn I'm trying to pop is the fact that we have a whole bunch of abilities in the Hunter verse that honestly have a hard time being categorized in their own category, or at least I would be usually having that hard time categorizing them in their own category. And I was gonna make a video about abilities that, well, look at this. This is actually an ability from this category. Isn't that surprising? But just as I was making that, I'm realizing, or I started to realize that, well, honestly, most of the abilities here could just be explained otherwise, or could be in use in other ways. What I'm trying to say is, you could have the same ability being done in multiple types of ways in Hunter x Hunter. Obviously, in the minuses, you're gonna find little differences, little weaknesses here, but advantages there. But the possibility is there, and because the possibility is there, you gotta find the best way to explain each ability when you see it from a character. And I was just gonna talk about conjurers at first, then dive into emitters, and just stroll through the nen chart, go from A to B to C, and finish it up with a couple of abilities. I was gonna talk about Subone, and I was gonna talk about her transformation into a bike, then the dude that did transform into a hammer, MC Hammer. But then, it just got out of hand. I arrived at emitters, these fellas, over here, and it just got complicated, man. I thought I understood my subject, still I didn't. And to me, this feels like the perfect medium, or the perfect method to talk about it. Because as I talk, new ideas pop in, counter ideas pop in, and it gets really difficult to make it in a video, and that's just complicated. So let me make it a how many times long type of video, so that in any which case it's only for the nerds that want to know so much more about it, and if they want to, they can sit through the whole thing. Now, enough dilly-dallying, let's actually get into it. Now, the main subject I wanted to talk about today, and I just want to start with this one, so that in case there is any happenings and happenstances later on of a second version of this video, you know, I I predicted it, and I made it concentrated into one subject. So today I'm trying to concentrate it into the emitters, the people that emit aura, the throwers of auras around. Give me a second. bad. I have a bunch of static around. I don't know if you can hear the static, but on my end it's kind of crazy. Got some crazy static here. I got some crazy static. There's some crazy static here. So yes, emitters. The emitters. What can I say about emitters? Well, first of all, from our understanding, emitters are simply people that have a much better control and much better ability to control their aura or have influence over their aura at a distance. They can have their aura active and do the things they wanted to do from great distances, if you know what I mean. So most of their most of their relationship with the aura is the ability that they have to have it still be constantly powerful outside of their body, outside of their reach. That's what we understand about them. Now that's where it gets interesting because most of the Hatsus, most of the uh, saying Hatsu is a bit of a wordful. I'm just gonna sort of say categories to simplify it. Most of the non-category for the emitters, most of the abilities that they create sort of focus on shooting out the aura. In the simplest ways that they work, it is the aura itself being thrown out of their body at high speeds. It is quite an effective attack and it gives them range. Now you might be mistaken into thinking that that means that they are always range types and such, but Hunter really plays around with that whole game. Anybody can be a range type, anybody can be a close scouter. It all depends on how you use it. But yeah, emitters in the simplest term are people that emit the aura, are people that emit it. It's not just about the speed of it, it's about the distance, it's about, it really depends on the user. It's about the distance, the speed, it's just about aura not being attached to the body, what it does outside of the body. And that's how I understood it. Now, that's where it gets interesting because we understand the non categories as one, they have a function, they have a function, an umbrella of functions under that function. They do something, and as we understand what they do, that's that sort of gives us an idea of where the limit is and what the possibilities are. But then you also have the possibilities of everybody pretty much to be able to dabble in to the nans, to the other nan types, to the other nan categories. They could be an emitter and double in enhancement, double in manipulation. Each to whoever, whichever, whomstever, their choice to double into the things that are close or not close to their nan type. Preferably close, since you have just a better time using those close to you. And from our understanding, obviously, since there are types, you don't expect one type to go beyond what the others can do, or at least to infringe to some way in some ways on what other types are all about. For example, you don't expect an ability that is purely about emission to manipulate somebody, at least not without a whole lot of complications. And all those complications might come in the form of secondary categories. But pure emission cannot control somebody. Can we agree on that? You have to. This is not a dialogue. So, simply put, pure emission is pure emission. It cannot do that. And but the abilities that are able to use emission and other abilities and other categories have the possibility to emulate manipulation in some ways. But then this is where it gets interesting because new abilities get introduced all the time. The first abilities we get from emission are pretty simple. They're pretty chill. They are quite simple, in fact. They are shooting and bullets, the easiest ones to understand. The only thing we get to see from them is the ability that some of them increase the power by doing some crazy shit to their own body, giving them the shape of or hollowing out their fingers so that the non bullets gain so much power. It's so interesting, but it's also kind of fucked up. But it makes sense. It increases the power of the projectile. We've only seen projectiles up to that point, and then it sort of got interesting because emission is honestly all about the control outside of your body, as I understood it. But then teleportation came in the game. At some point in time, teleportation came in the game, and it came in the form of Gorenu at first, and yeah, it came in the form of Gorenu, and it came in the form of Nen Beast, Nen Creations, which to me was hella weird because then that also falls under apparently uh, emission, which to some extent it makes sense. But how is it primarily emission is sort of lost to me. But we understand it as simply the Nen being out of body and being used in some ways and some shapes, instead of it being a creation out of Nen that takes a shape and might gain independence dependently if that's what you're trying to do or not. But in this case, in the case of Nen Beast created out of emission, they are being controlled actively. They are being always controlled actively by the user. That's what makes them emissive Nen abilities. They still have the link to the people, and mostly if they have shape, I would imagine there is a contribution from transmutation, or maybe mostly transmutation, I would think a contribution from transmutation. But I would argue that mostly it's gonna be a Nen that is all about the emission going forward, and I sort of accepted that, so there's that. But then it got interesting. It got really interesting when these concepts came in. The concepts of teleportation, the concepts of literally having something disappear out of nowhere from a Nen mine. That's what they're gonna call it later on. It's a Nen placement that has something teleported by interacting with the Nen. And that's where I sort of had a block. What does that mean? What do you mean by that? Now, luckily, recently I fell into a video that talked about it, and I was like, oh, okay, it makes sense to some degree, but still hard to imagine. But it was the concept of Nen transferring, or at least Nen being literally, how may I say this, like a transposition of two Nens. Man, I'm struggling. Let me explain it like this. Let's say I have water in a cup, and I transpose that same water into another cup, but only half. And then somehow, without using the usual motion, the two waters switch cups. You know what I mean? So both waters, since they both came from me, they both made of the same substance, without having to go through change, so they just switch cups. And apparently it's a part of, well, the homeboy emission. So it's an emittive ability, or it's a part of emission, which I struggle to this day to understand. But if it is part of it, it is part of it. It is what it is. But then when it comes to, for me, for example, there are probably multiple ways to explain that besides emission, and that's where the trouble came in. That's where the struggle came in to understand most of these new abilities, and most of them coming from this new gang who are all pretty much who have this emphasis on one category of none, which makes me think that they don't really dabble into the neighboring categories, or they don't dabble into any other, and which makes me think that all the NAN abilities they might develop is sort of focused on literally the type that they have assigned to them. You know what I mean? So when I see this, and when I saw this NAN creation over here, I'm sorry, I'm struggling to find it actually. And I saw this, and when I saw, I think I'm on the wrong page. Come on, man. Lakinser. Yeah, listen, it's the page with Nobunaga and Luini. I don't quite remember the page, but I can say that, yeah. So from that page, there's this assumption exactly. So this fella right here, who literally goes through walls and teleports. Obviously, there are a lot of conditions to his ability. The placement of NAN through a certain location and being able to then teleport there. But then my only wonder was, is this pure emission, or is this a mix of emission and something else? And that's where it gets trippy, you know what I mean? Because we understand all abilities as falling into different umbrellas. You could either have an ability that entirely focuses on the type, an ability that focuses on the type while using different other types, but just for a variation of the ability and not quite a new ability. You can have an ability that only truly functions because you are using multiple types. For example, the first one would have to be Franklin's ability, which to me is literally the type in use at all times. Franklin shoots bullets. It's a mission, that's all there is to it. But then you have abilities that can have variations through the use of other types. For example, Gon. Gon is a guy who has one ability but can vary it through the use of other types, scissors and papers, emission and transmutation. And then there are people whose abilities in the basic form use multiple types. And for that I would have to say the main culprit of that would have to be, man, I said that, now I have a blank. Huh. I can't find one. Somebody whose ability is purely the type, or somebody whose ability is the use of multiple types. But for the sake of argument, let's say Phaeton here, whose ability has him creating a whole a suit. So there is some transmutation, we would argue, for the sun he creates, and some conjuration through the suit he creates to protect himself, at least from assumption, from that sun he creates. Yeah, let's call that it. I mean, there is that, but there is also Banalenov, who creates music, that creates objects, but he probably emits the sounds, or uses and then to emit the sound, so it has the properties to create the things he wants to create in that circle that he's in. Yeah, I think those are good examples. Those are pretty good examples, I would say. But yeah, that is the third category, the people that create, that whose nan literally involves them using multiple of the categories. And for me, for example, when I see abilities like this, they could be explained by the third kind, uh, by being a combination of multiple categories of nan. But from my understanding, this is purely one thing, at least from the shape it has, at least from what I understand of the group Morena has. Till the moment he dies and it even closes. But we could argue that this whole creation over here is probably something you could call a slit that he created through, through conjuration, since conjurations doesn't simply revolve around creating matter out of thin air. It can also involve some reconfiguration of matter. But anyway, that was the trouble I found with emission. But then again, like I was talking about, we have her, which her ability could be explained through a use of emission and manipulation, or maybe some transmission, some transmutation, if you want to argue hard about it. But although I kind of doubt it, but something is allowing her to create this. And I don't want to think that this is just her deciding to project something other than herself, or other than the aura. So does that mean that emission also allows for the projections of things not that are not aura? It is the control of aura at a distance, but is it also the ability to have aura being used as a vehicle for something? Does that still stay purely a transmittive ability, or purely an emittive ability through this? And I would have argued the for it being purely emittive, till he talked about the unconsciousness of this character being a stopper to the ability still being in use. So she could only muster four informations to get out of this guy till he got knocked out. And when he got knocked out, apparently she couldn't get that information out of him. The information does not come out of his mouth, but there is a need for consciousness apparently, which leads me strongly to think that it is manipulation. That's how I see it. Because to me, if it was purely emittive, and that there is a possibility for emitters to project something other than the aura itself, but probably the will of the people to create some sort of questioning, or some sort of questioning to the soul, as she does and punches it in, it should be able to come out as the information she wants, no matter what. But if she's able to literally transport concepts through her through her mission, that's to me is where it sort of gets blurred with specialization, and where it gets complicated to talk about non-abilities being either, how can I say this? Let's just say that if there is a line between emission and specialization, if being able to project something that is beyond the aura itself, or with a couple of conditions or something along those lines, you might have to say that that is pretty much just specialization. What makes specialization special at that point? Or if it is because if it is purely emission, no other type is involved, and she arrives at this she arrives at this ability to be able to plot that information. what what makes her not be a superior character to Pakunoda, pretty much, who is literally a specialist, who has also to touch somebody and ask a question so she can get the information she wants. That's what I'm trying to say. So to me, the line gets blurred, but I would argue strongly that this is probably a use of two or more types of NAND to achieve this effect, to achieve this effect of having a literal a literal NAND tests, I might say, because she doesn't transform it into an electric signal or anything of that sort, which would have been transmutation. So yeah, there is one of my points here. So to recapitulate and make it a simpler way to explain the point is simply that what if it is purely an ability out of transmutation, the genre itself, sorry, not the genre, but the category itself is getting beyond its limits. It feels beyond its limits. What is truly being transmutated? Is it simply the NAND, or is it being the NAND plus maybe the will? If it is the will, it sort of ends up being a form of, you guessed it, specialization to me. That being said, let's get into the other example. Because in this case, if we argue that it is purely emission, you could argue, it is argued that that's what is being projected, and that's what creates this thing. Till we reach these guys. Oh, hold on. Yeah, till we reach these guys. Wait, when did this get censored? Why would you do that? Till we reach these guys. This demonstration of power over here. So we got another emitter, Cerebellum. That's a crazy name to say, man. Cerebellum. Who received the knife and transport the impact through his body through emission. And I found myself again wondering, oh, so is this purely emittive? Is this a pure use of emission that allowed him to transport a literal knife to the can? And that's where the concept of the non-transmutation that we talked about, or at least that I learned about in really recently, I'm talking about yesterday recent, sort of came back to me. And if we can accept that, it does make sense that she's able, or that he's able to transport things of in this manner. Because what I can, or what I might argue about, is the fact that it's not done like, for example, Leworio. Leworio has something similar to this, but there is a line. You see a whole line, a whole process, a whole way that the NAND travels to this point. But here it is arguably pretty much a teleportation of the thing. Something akin to, if you want to go way back, but using the example that I learned about recently, Grid Island, the teleportation of Gorenu and his monkeys, which is something that to me is apparently just all emission. It's all emittive abilities. I mean, the monkeys are emitted. The ability to control them is still under emission. But what was not emission was, let's let's say their shape, their form, how they look, and that would have been transmutation. But the ability to switch from monkey to monkey, but also from monkey to other people, was not. And the conditions to actually switch from people that are literally not even Goreno, which to me is crazy powerful, is also all part of condition, all part of emission. So this, I guess, makes sense under that umbrella. What he is transmitting is impact, or I hope is only impact. Is impact. I hope for him, because that means that if he has to fight somebody who is barehanded, what gets transported? Is it their hand, or is it only the impact? I'm curious to see. Please drop a new chapter. I'm waiting for it. Now, but seriously, what I'm trying to say is, where emission here, I guess, gets its base is the ability to literally move something through something without a conduit, even though what we have seen so far has been the use of a conduit when you transport something. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to talk about. Although again, it can easily be explained through some sort of transmutation. Let's say you transmute, if it is possible, you transmute the aura around you into a substance that is supposedly able to, akin to a portal. Is it possible to transmute a portal, or is it only possible to conjure a portal? For example, is transmutation limited to things that exist? If so, why is bungee gum? Okay, no, let's not stray here. But what I'm saying is, this could also be some form of double double into other categories of men. But again, like I said, because of who they are, I doubt it. I doubt that it is dibbling and doubling into other kinds of net. So where am I going with this? What is the conclusion to this thing? Well, all I'm trying to say is, as far as the potentiality of emission goes, where I see the limit might have to be in the transportation of things that have the same aura, or that have the conditioned abilities, I guess. But if it is, for example, the creation of, or the ability to pick up something out of somebody in the manner that Our Lady Lynch did, I feel like we might be just dibbling and dabbling into specialization. Because as far as I saw, I feel it feels a bit too free. And to me, specialization almost free feels like the place where you can get that freely done ability. Because even when the characters have to argue about what sort of ability they're facing, they always get the stump of, well, if it is specialization, none of what we said might be applicable. It's free real estate. Whatever we do can't be easily understood. That's usually how their debates go. We see it a couple of pages later when they have to enter this room. We see it multiple times. Right here, and they have to enter the room, and the whole argument they do have about it being a mind type, how do you say, mind type non-ability, something along those lines. But yeah, what is the true limit of emission? Where does it truly stop? What is the true power of emission? Is it limited to what I'm saying? But yeah, to me, simply put, Lynch is a use of emission other categories to achieve that effect, while cerebellum is arguably the use of the other one, the use of purely emission through transference of matter. I think that's how the dude said it. It's transference of matter. Emission englobed in something that allows for the matter to transfer. Even though conjuration could probably do it, emission is able to do it through probably a whole lot of conditions. That's how I see it. That's to me how it makes sense. And that to me is how I would have to explain Lynch's ability and how I would have to explain Mr. Cerebellum's ability. But now that I accept a bit of Cerebellum's ability, I could see how it would work the same for Lynch. While you could argue that if he can transfer something of his decision like a knife, Lynch could transfer something of her decision like a thought that she asked about. You see what I mean? It doesn't end. It is absolutely a possibility from if we accept it from that point of view. But yeah, that's the gist of emission to me. It is an absolutely free category where you really have the ability to either leave your NAN for trap, throw it at high speed, but also use it as the means for crazy things at a distance that apparently don't have to be associated with other types. You don't have to leave your NAN and make it a NAN spike with transmutation. You can just leave your NAN and say, listen, if a foot hits you, I'm gonna need that foot transmuted to that foot transported all the way to the left or something along those lines. And those qualities or that coding that you do with that NAN apparently is part of emission, so it's free real estate apparently. Although to me again that feels like specialization, that feels like a really detailed amount of conditions to put on one ability. Yeah, so I don't know how long I've been talking, and I hope it made the amount of sense I was hoping it does. But I see it as a good start. I see it as a great start to understanding NAN a bit better. Although I can leave this answer in the nuances of how we understand emitters in the realm of Hunter, I still feel like it would help to have some clearances or some clearer perspectives on how most of these abilities work. Thank you. Thank you for the listen. Have a good one. Let me know what you think. And that is all.